From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
Welcome back. My name is John, and this is the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast. This is your weekly podcast about consumption. We are, of course, proud members of the You Run Podcast Network. You can find all of our previous episodes, all of our upcoming episodes, and all of the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network at yourunpodcast.com. With me this week, chuckling at my horrible talking, is Sean, and he's the host of this show. Sean, how are you doing with your hosting duties?
This is going to be a really tough show if you're having problems talking. But I want to ask you, John, is it time to make lemonade in our pants yet?
It absolutely is.
I know who you are. I know what you are. Why don't you quit yourself?
I'm not very efficient at such tasks.
That was the alternate line. I thought maybe that might be too harsh to kind of lead with.
It's pretty strong right off the top. You might get us kicked right off of YouTube for that one.
No, I hope not. I don't mean anything by it.
Just bleep that thing right out.
Why don't you go yourself?
I'll try.
That might work, actually.
Watching?
That might work.
Why don't you go bleep yourself?
Yeah.
Well, while I go bleep myself, why don't you tell us what you've been watching over the last couple days?
All right, so I got a chance to watch a few things. I watched, number one, I didn't know this show even existed, Vice. You know, they do their Dark Side. They do Dark Side of Comedy. They do Dark Side of The Ring. That's probably their biggest one. Dark Side of the 90s. I think they did Dark Side of the 2000s. I think they did Dark Side of, like, football or something. The NFL, something along those lines. I found a new one that I didn't even know started and had finished already. It's called Dark Side of the Cage, and it's about UFC, or basically MMA. I think it's mostly UFC. Mostly people you probably have heard of. So I watched the first episode. It was about Kimbo Slice. I don't know if you know who Kimbo Slice is. I would assume that you do. So Kimbo Slice was like basically a bare knuckle YouTube brawler person. And they kind of go into his backstory, how he got involved in the backyard fighting kind of thing. And that metamorphosis changed him, transformed him.
Was ICP involved?
No, not in this episode. I don't know if they have anything to do with that. Why would they?
No whoop whoop. I don't know. They do a lot of backyard fighting shit.
That's backyard wrestling. This is like
guessing.
Bare knuckle fighting. Anyways,
we all got to start somewhere, Sean.
AKA Kevin Ferguson. His manager was like an owner of one of the owners of Reality Kings, which is, you know, Bang Bus, MILF Hunter, like all those porn sites, and was a childhood friend, or at least a high school friend of his. And he found him bouncing at some strip club, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come work for me?" Because he had a kid in high school. Kimbo Slice did, Kevin Ferguson, and he needed help monetarily. So this guy, which I don't remember his name, hired him, and eventually they get him into backyard fighting because he was good at fighting. And they kind of talk about his transition from doing this backyard fighting thing to doing Strike Force, or Strike XC, I think was the Elite XC, which was like a Showtime MMA production that they had for a little bit. And then Dana White from UFC talked all this shit about him.
Don't they still do Strike Force now, or is it something
They
else
might,
now?
But it's probably owned. Like some of the people that were in Elite XC or Strike Force or whatever it was called are now in Bellator. So like some of the promoter people. Yeah. I totally forgot that he was in the Ultimate Fighter house, and he lost the first round, but they let him stick around so he could still continue to train. And he got pretty good. And Dana White, who was one of his biggest critics, eventually signed him to UFC. And he died a few years back, maybe like 10 years ago. He had an enlarged heart and didn't know. He knew he had an enlarged heart, but never said anything, and just kind of like let it go. And it ended up taking his life. He was waiting for a heart transplant at like the end of his life. So it was kind of a little bittersweet. From all accounts, he seemed like a really nice guy. Everybody said he was a nice guy. So you got to go by what they say. That's the first thing. Second thing I watched was a movie from 1997 called Breakdown. And it has Kurt Russell and JT Walsh, MC Gainey, who has been in like everything. And basically Kurt Russell and his wife are traveling from Boston to San Diego. And in the middle of somewhere in the desert, like Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, that area, their car breaks down, and a trucker comes. JT Walsh plays this trucker who comes and says, "Hey, I can take you guys up to the next rest stop or gas station, or whatever. You can call a tow truck." And Kurt Russell's like, I think we're okay. And his wife says, "Well, I can go with them and you can stay here with the car." And then when I get to the next place, we'll make a
bad idea.
Exactly. It did turn out to be a bad idea. We'll take your, I'll call a tow truck to come pick the car up, and he gets the car started. He realizes just a couple wires were loose, and he clips them back together, whatever. And the car starts right up, and he goes to the next, it's a diner, Bell's Diner. And he goes to the diner, and she's never shown up. Nobody knows who she is. Nobody knows who this mysterious truck driver is. And the rest of the movie is like Kurt Russell trying to unravel this mystery of like where his wife went and what happened and the trucker and all this stuff. You know the movie, right?
I know the movie. I feel like I've seen it before, but I can't remember it. We were talking about this before off mic, where it's because we were talking about it in conjunction with some Jeff Bridges serial killer movie, if I remember right. Because the covers on them look very similar.
Yeah.
Or something
they
like
seem
that.
kind of similar, high level, like similar movies.
I think I've seen it, but I probably need to watch it again, tell me if I need to watch it again, if it was worthwhile, because it's probably been since like VHS since I've seen it, if I've seen it.
I really liked it. I thought it was really very, kind of like edge of your seat.
I generally like Kurt Russell, so that's an easy sell.
Yeah, it was good. I liked it. I was kind of then looking for other movies that were similar to it, which made me find the movie Duel with Dennis Weaver. It's a Steven Spielberg movie from like 1971. I don't remember who else is in it. I know Dennis Weaver's in it. I haven't watched it yet, but that's like next on my kind of list of stuff that I want to watch. And then last thing I'll talk about is yesterday. I've had this for a while. It's a old VHS movie it's not really a movie. It's like a 45-minute promotional thing. It's called Freestyle USA. And it is basically a BMX video of guys it's like an extended music video. There's maybe 4 or 5 songs that play in this thing, and they just show people on vert ramps for one of the songs, and the next one will be like flatland tricks, where they're like doing pogos on the bike and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I had watched a few minutes of it a while back, and I decided I had a few minutes last night before my kids were like, making a ruckus and shit, and they ended up sitting down and watching this. And my older daughter was saying how she was, "Oh, I'm so tired, Dad. I'm tired. I'm going to go to bed." And she came and sat down and watched this show, and she was instantly like energized. They wanted to see like these tricks. The music in this thing I'll post a clip. One of the bands is called Metal MCs, and they are basically like a low rent, you would say poor man, but it's like a homeless man's version of the Beastie Boys. They have like 2 guys that rap back and forth, and they to rock music. And it's really funny. It's really, unintentionally funny, but we sat and watched that whole thing, which then inspired me. I didn't finish it, but I started the movie Rad so I could watch that, but I didn't finish it. So I'm not going to talk about that today. But yeah, those are the 3 big things that I got a chance to watch since we last spoke. Why don't you tell me about the movies or things? It doesn't have to be a movie. Why don't you tell me about what you watched? So
I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you brought up BMX bikes and whatnot, I've been in kind of a rut as far as like finding things I actually want to watch the last week or so. I don't know if you go through that where you're just like uninterested.
Yeah, for sure.
In everything. That's kind of where I've been, but I did fall in a little bit of a rabbit hole of like old skate videos. And by old, I mean like I started with the 90s Blind video with Jason Lee, and I think Spike Jonze directed it and whatnot. And it just kind of spiraled from there. And it's a lot of the same thing. Like the first one, the Blind one, I forget what the video is called. I'm sure I could find it easily enough. The music on that's pretty funny because it goes from some like Al Jolson like jazz song over to like a Black Flag song.
Okay.
To like the Jackson 5. I was like, okay, I don't think they paid for any of this shit, but like regardless, it's like the weirdest like combination of music. But yeah, that was like probably a good, I want to say like an hour, but it was probably more like 3 hours of me just falling in that rabbit hole of just watching old like 90s skate videos.
That's funny. I a couple months, maybe about a month back, I started thinking like, I'm going to go watch all these old skate videos that I either had already seen like years ago or that I never saw that I had heard so much. So I actually watched The Search for Animal Chin like, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, just on a whim. Like, I'm just going to sit and watch this old like Bones Brigade video.
Yeah.
It's kind of
funny.
Well,
I know a lot of it. It's kind of funny, like, because I was just doing this on YouTube. So it's just kind of like,
same.
putzing around from one video to another. And every now and then, like, it's funny because it would autoplay like a newer one. And it's not necessarily bad, but it's painfully obvious when it's like, oh wow, this is a decent camera and everything looks really new now and all this. And like, they're not just skating around like a downtown, like main street area that happens to have rails. Like they're in an actual park now. So it's kind of crazy. You can see how far skateboarding's come just by watching that. But, you know, like I said, I don't know how interesting any of that is. I did find something really cool. So I watched a short interview with Trey Parker and Matt Stone talking about the movie Team America. Mm-hmm. They said they were really one of the things that really kind of got them into that style of movie, even though they hated making it, was a show from the 60s called Thunderbirds. Are you familiar with this show?
I absolutely am familiar with Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds are go.
So the whole thing is on YouTube. Like I found a playlist that has all like, I think it's like 60 episodes. Holy shit, is this fun. So the whole series is on YouTube, and I found it to be pretty entertaining because it's basically like a 1960s sci-fi like show set in the future, and it's all these marionette puppets that essentially play like a search and rescue team, but things go poorly and explode quite often. It kind of has vibes of, and I realize this would be inspiring, not the other way around. It's kind of got like C-Lab vibes as far as like the, you know, Comedy Central show of like there's a crew of people and they kind of fuck things up perpetually and eventually the job gets done, sort of. Except it's not underwater. So it's kind of like that type of, and it's less adult comedy. Like this is a very G-rated comedy. But if you liked Team America World Police, which I would hope you do because that movie's pretty great, this is going to be something that it moves a little slow. Like I would like it to be paced a little quicker. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the drawbacks of shooting marionette
the difficulty
dolls.
Of using marionettes.
Right. But just watching like, these marionettes have some pretty awesome cars. Like I wish these cars would have made it to actual production as opposed to just toy cars. But it's just ridiculous. Like some of the lines that they say are fun as hell. I posted a clip from it the other day on our social media, both on Blue Sky and on Instagram. So you can see like a minute thing of a guy getting like ejected out of a plane. And by guy, I mean a puppet, only to have the plane like explode spectacularly into a building. It's utterly ridiculous. But it's a pretty fun way for like an hour show runtime, so like roughly 50-minute episodes. They're pretty entertaining. And again, you can watch them all for free right now on YouTube. So that's, yeah, Thunderbirds are go. I'm absolutely a fan.
Check it out in the show notes. It'll be there.
That's right. Be in the show notes. I'll do two because one, I don't have a lot to say. I went back and rewatched Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which I haven't watched since I was a kid. And I remember liking it as a kid because it's campy and it's cheesy and it's, you know, it's a monster movie, basically. Watching it as an adult, holy shit, was I fucking annoyed because they sing way too goddamn much. And it's not like fun singing, like where, not to use Trey Parker and Matt Stone again, but it's not like the South Park movie that's a musical and it's funny enough that it's still making you laugh, or I'm sure there's other ones that do that too. It's just like a bunch of random bad singing in like office complexes and shit. And I just was annoyed as shit with it. So that's available on Tubi and you can get into the show notes, but I don't know if I would recommend watching that. Then the only other thing I'll bring up today that I thought was interesting. So this was some National Geographic. It must have been a show because it was, again, about that 50-minute runtime. Mm-hmm. It's called Drugs, Inc. and it's shot in Detroit on Halloween in year question. I don't know what fucking year it came out. It was a while ago.
What decade do you think?
I think it's like early, like 2000s. Like,
oh, okay.
Not, yeah, like around there. Again, it was on YouTube, so it will be in the show notes. And if you need me to find it, I'm sure I can. But it's basically just taking place October 28th, roughly through October 31st. It just follows this handful of drug dealers around Detroit selling drugs and talking about the drug trade in Detroit, specifically on Halloween. What I always thought was funny is like, I haven't bought drugs from a drug dealer in a couple of years, unless you count a dispensary. So like, I haven't had to do that. Quite honestly, I'm okay with not doing that for a while. I feel like if the drug dealer I was going to purchase said drugs from had a National Geographic camera crew with them, I might reconsider purchasing from said drug dealer. But they go through this whole show selling drugs like for an hour to a bunch of random people and no one seems to care. I don't know. It was kind of interesting. It's interesting in the sense that, like, you know, it's our local area and our local drug dealers. So why not check it out?
Have you ever seen Bangin' in Little Rock? It's called Gang War Bangin' in Little Rock. It was a documentary about.
I think so.
I think it's like the Bloods in
sounds familiar.
Arkansas. Yeah. That's kind of one of those shows where you're like, these people are on camera. I mean, a lot of them have handkerchiefs and stuff over their faces.
Oh, these guys have masks on the whole. Like the drug dealers have masks on the entire time. But still, you're taking a camera crew to an illegal act, and they're not. I mean, they talk about selling weed, but they're talking about selling like Molly and ecstasy and cocaine and crack, like everything that's very, very illegal. Not just the stuff that's like, yeah, at least at the time, like, yeah, that's illegal, but like it's just weed. Like it's not that. It's like all the shit that you could think of. Yeah, all the shit that you could think of. They're selling it and bringing National Geographic with them to these clubs to like sell to presumably kids or young adults or whatever. So for me, that was kind of the funniest part. It's just like, there's a camera crew rolling around my next door selling drugs and stuff. And here I am sitting home, probably just watching like the Wolfman or some bullshit.
You're staying out of trouble, keeping your nose clean.
Well, yes. Yeah, figuratively and literally. But yeah, that's all I got for this week. I'll try to do better next week. I've just been so meh.
You're doing just fine, John.
Yeah, keep telling yourself that. Anyway, it is still April and we're still talking Gary Busey. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and continue forward with Gary Busey April and talk about the movie Silver Bullet. So we will return shortly.
AI John here. Have you ever wanted to take a deeper dive on the mysteries surrounding the lives and deaths of notable figures?
I feel like I'm asking myself that every day, but I'm old and don't know where to get this kind of information.
Well, I've got the podcast for you. The Between the Facts podcast looks at the events that define their legacies, unearthing hidden truths, alternative narratives, and the theories that keep us questioning the official narrative.
Now, that sounds like something I can dig into. Where can I listen to this show?
You can find Between the Facts and a lot of other great podcasts at youronpodcast.com. I guarantee that you'll find something there for you.
All right, so we are back, and as mentioned, we are going to be talking about the movie Silver Bullet. This is the second movie to grace our presence in the month of our Lord and Savior, Gary Busey. This is the movie that we are going to be showing this month at Batch Brewing down in Corktown in Detroit. It is our monthly Frankenstein's event. We're going to be showing this on April 24th. Movie starts at 7 o'clock. There will be hot dogs. There will be beer, and it's baseball season, and there's a baseball bat in this movie. So that's close to fucking enough.
Be there, be square.
Yes. What Sean said. With that in mind, we always start with a third-party review. So this week, our third-party review comes from Monsters Holding Bee on Rotten Tomatoes. And Monsters Holding Bee says, creepy uncle versus creepy priest, 4.5 out of 5 stars. So that's it. Sean, what is Silver Bullet all about?
All right, so for that, we go to IMDb and we check out the name of a movie called Silver Bullet. It's from 1985. It's rated R. It's a 1 hour and 35 minutes. This gets 6.4 out of 10 for 33,000 ratings. This is actually sitting in popularity at 3958, down 582 from something else, from some other number. We cracked the case.
It swapped spots with Blown Away.
We cracked the case on why Blown Away had risen in popularity, and that's because it's the anniversary. Well, March 10th was when Corey Haim passed away, so there's a little bit of a fervor about his movies, I guess, every year. But anyways, we want to know what this movie's about. We go to the storyline and the plot. Never know which one's which, but we'll read the one on top, because if they didn't want it read first, they wouldn't have put it on the top. It says, in a small town, brutal killings are starting to plague the close-knit community. Marty Coslaw, not Coleslaw, but Coslaw, a paraplegic boy, is convinced the murders are the doings of a werewolf. And if we scroll on down...
That Marty Coleslaw over there, he's a real psycho. He sees werewolves and shit, and...
He's putting too much mayonnaise in the coleslaw. We go down to the storyline. This comes care of webmistress at shiversofhorror.com. Thank you, webmistress. Common, very often contributor to the show. It says, the small town of Tarker's Mills was a place that was very peaceful, where nothing extraordinary ever happened until one night when murders began. The townspeople believe it's some maniacal killer on the loose, whom they intend to hunt down. Marty, a young handicapped boy, believes the killer is no man at all, but a werewolf. After a run-in with a werewolf, Marty and his sister Jane hunt all over town for the man who is the werewolf.
I really hope you isolate the sentence. Thank you very much, webmistress, and save that for later use.
Sean, before we get now I can save it for later use. Rubbing my hands together.
Sean, before we get too much into this, who's in this movie? Is there anyone that we care about in here?
Well, we've got a few people that you may have heard of. We've got Everett McGill, who plays Reverend Lowe. He's been in a bunch of David Lynch movies. He's like in a bunch of Broadway stuff. He was in Twin Peaks, Dune, Straight Story. Those are just David Lynch movies. I almost said Kevin Lynch. We've got Cory Haim, who we most recently talked about in Blown Away. He plays Marty. He's in License to Drive, Lost Boys. This was one of his first big movie roles. We've got Terry O'Quinn, who plays Sheriff Haller, who was in Lost. He's the stepfather of the titular Stepfather series. He was in Young Guns. And then last but not least, the person that we watched this movie for was Gary Busey. He plays Uncle Red. He's the subject of our theme month and fine films like Hider in the House, Lethal Weapon, Point Break, and The Buddy Holly Story, etc. Stuff also with Gary Busey. I don't know.
This is also our second movie in a row with a character that has had one Seinfeld appearance.
Who?
Elaine's
Everett
dad
McGill?
is in this. Nope. Lawrence Tierney is Elaine's dad. So.
Yep. The bar owner guy, right?
Yes. So he's also, most people think of him as Joe from Reservoir Dogs, probably.
Yeah. Yep.
So
I was going to include him in the list, but I don't know how many people would recognize him, so I just kind of
I don't think people recognize him from his name, his actual name, but I think if you rattle off some of the characters that he's played, that's probably where you do. So, Sean, is this a first-time watch for you, or do you have any type of history with this particular Wolfen movie?
I don't have a history with this movie. Like, I know I've known of it for a long time. I feel like I have seen it at some point, but I don't. I get this one mixed, like some of the stuff that happened in this movie mixed with what I remember to happen in The Lost Boys for some reason. So I never really saw this from front to back before. How about you?
I've seen it a couple times. I saw it once as a kid, and then I want to say I've watched it in the last year or so, just kind of for something to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the big picture of werewolf movies, there's a lot of bad ones. So this one's always stuck out as one that has a lot of good stuff in it. I stand by that, not to play my hand too early on how I feel about this, but this one's it's got a lot more good than bad in it, which we'll get into. How about Stephen King, though? Do you have an opinion on Stephen King or Stephen King movies? Is this our first Stephen King movie that we've talked about? I was going to
say, I think this is the first Stephen King movie we've talked about.
I think it is, too.
I don't really have an opinion on...
Creepshow.
Oh, that's true.
So,
I don't have a big opinion on his books because I don't read many books.
Yeah.
So really the biggest experience I did read The Shining, but the biggest experience that I have with Stephen King is through his movies or the movies that are based on his stories, or maybe he's written the screenplay on some of these, but so many movies that are quote unquote Stephen King movies he hates because they don't do the book justice.
Usually the ones that I like too.
Like Maximum Overdrive, The Running Man.
Or The Shining.
I like The Fog a lot.
Yeah.
The one with Thomas Jane, and I think there's there's a black and white and a color version of that. I like that, but he doesn't carry
the one with
and I liked Misery.
You mean the one with Atkins in it, The Fog?
Atkins.
Tom Atkins in the John Carpenter one, The Fog?
Oh, I'm thinking The Mist. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
John Carpenter.
I was going to say, I don't remember Thomas Jane being in that, but
yeah,
Mist,
I'm
Fog,
thinking The Mist.
Same fucking difference.
Yeah, I know.
Mist, Fog, same thing.
They both make it hard to see. I mean, I don't have a lot of, like I said, I like Misery. I don't have a lot of experience with his movies because, and plus, I mean, I'm sure I've seen a lot of movies that are based on his stories, but he always hates them. So I don't really have much of a, his name doesn't carry a whole lot of cachet in movies for me. I mean, it's cool. I think he's a prolific writer. I think from what I've read, I like what he writes, but I don't have enough experience with his written word to be like, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I can tell you when I'm looking for books that are horror books, I probably would reach for a Stephen King book because just for the name recognition.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. His books are too homeworky for me. Like I also read The Shining, and that was the last time I wanted to read a Stephen King book, and that kind of killed off my excitement to read anymore. Stephen King, he's just not for me.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. I do. I'm sure I've watched more of the movies that are based on his works than I can even think of because there's a shit ton of them. But I wouldn't say Stephen King's name being on something. It's not like Gary Busey's name being on something where I'm like, well, I can watch
Auto
this.
watch.
Yeah,
Auto watch.
It's not for me. It's not neither a sell or a deterrent with him. So I'm kind of lukewarm on the Stephen King front for whatever's that worth. Whatever that is worth. God, I told you I can't fucking talk.
Talking, not a strong suit.
So coming into this relatively fresh, or at least fresh where you didn't have like a strong memory of it from what you said, like what did you like about this one? Or did you like anything about this one?
I really liked basically like the way that it was filmed. I like the look of the movie. I like when I say the look of the movie, I'm thinking specifically about that like posse scene in the swamp where the anamorphic is kicking hardcore. There's the light flares. They're kind of walking through the swamp and it's all foggy. It's got a real atmospheric tone. Like the whole movie has a really cool atmospheric tone to it. It's creepy, but it's not too creepy. It's kind of tense, but it's not too tense. And they know when to ratchet the tension up. And I think Busey's hilarious for like the first joke when he tells the donkey, the jackass joke to Corey Haim. I'm like, I laughed when he told the joke. I would never tell the joke because I can't. I don't have a Busey impersonation. I couldn't do it justice, but I legitimately laughed.
I love his Piss on the Yankees song. I agree with you, like, as far as the tone of this movie. It's interesting because it almost feels like at times it has a bit of an identity crisis because it feels like, especially since this is super young Corey Haim and Megan Follows, they're both kids in this movie and they're primarily who are telling the story. Specifically, the sister is the narrator and Corey Haim's, realistically, he's kind of the hero of the movie. So there's times where the movie almost feels like it's pushing for like a PG-13, like borderline Monster Squad feel. And then there's times where it's absolutely not. And it goes hard R, gore, all the stuff that you want out of a horror movie. So I think that's a pretty cool balance. There's a lot of things narrative wise that I like that they chose here. I love that they don't give you an origin for how the werewolf came into this town. He's just there. That's it. Like, and that's fine for me. Like at this point, like, it's a werewolf movie. I think that's pretty fair going in. Like most people probably know that's what's happening with it. And I like that we didn't spend an extra 15 minutes just like spoilers. Here's I won't spoil it yet. I don't need 15 minutes of like where the werewolf came from, seeing him get bit and all that shit. Like, don't need it. I also like that they kind of took the less is more approach with the monster, and I'm sure. So this is kind of a double-edged one because this is kind of like I'm not going to call it a negative. I'm going to call it a nitpick, and I'll get to why. But I like that they took the less is more, that you don't really see the monster in full until the very end of the movie. I think that actually adds a lot to it. I love any of the scenes where he's holding the Peacekeeper and he's beating the shit out of people with it. It's the way that they made this like monster arm swing the bat. It looks really funny to me for whatever reason.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like overly animated somehow. It doesn't articulate quite the way that I would think a normal human arm does. Obviously, when we do get to the point of seeing the werewolf in full, especially the transformation, it's not the strongest transformation that we've seen in a werewolf movie by any stretch, or the strongest like creature that we've seen. That said, I prefer this over a CG wolf like 100% of the time. Like I'd rather see it like this, like warts and flaws and all that stuff with it, than see the like overly cartoony ones like we've seen in, what was that one with Benicio del Toro in it? That one wasn't
it just Wolfman or something?
Something like that. Might have been just, but whatever it was. And I really enjoy the bear trap joke that gets the guy not once but twice. I thought that was pretty entertaining as well.
Well, that's what I liked about that swamp scene so much, is that when it gets really tense, they kind of cut it with some humor. And I mean, how humorous can it be getting your foot or your leg caught in a bear trap and snapping on it twice? Evidently a lot, because I laughed at that too, because maybe I'm just a sick bastard. But I want to kind of go back to what you said about the werewolf, the kind of, I also like that they just give you these flashes, like they'll show the eyes, or they'll show part of the mouth, or they'll show the like a claw. Yeah. Or they'll show a foot, walking or something, but they don't give you the full picture. a lot. And I feel like that adds to the mystery. It adds to that kind of tension. It adds to the whole mystique of it. The other thing, I don't know if I would necessarily say that, I can't think right now off the top of my head, anything that is especially gory. Like at the beginning of the movie, we have a decapitation that kind of almost seems silly in a way. Like it's not horribly gory or graphic or disturbing really much in much of a way. What are some of like the really gory parts?
I mean, I guess it depends on how you want it. Like, I think the goriest might be the dude who gets the floorboard in the stomach and get. That's pretty gnarly.
Mm-hmm.
The dude who gets hit in the head with the bat is pretty good when he's in his bum trailer full of like cans. When he cracks him in the head with the bat, he like blows his head open with the bat. So that's pretty good. Those are probably the two most. The girl on the bed is a little bit gory. Like, I would have liked to have seen more of it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think that it could have gone way harder. But for a movie that I think is, it's not quite Monster Squad level of kid movie.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is probably aimed more at like the 12 to 14 crowd as opposed to the like 21 and like Gary Busey crowd.
Yeah, it definitely has that gateway horror feel to it.
Yeah.
Having, like you said, having Corey Haim be a major character, which he's not really even that high up in the building, which I thought was kind of surprising. Him be kind of the hero of the movie, him and Gary Busey, who Busey doesn't even show up till like 15, 20 minutes into the movie or so. I thought that's a nice touch. And it does feel, like you said earlier, it does feel like if there would have been PG-13 when this movie came out, this probably would have hit that. Because they don't even swear that much.
Yeah.
I think there's like a couple shits. I think there may be one fuck, which now that's like a PG movie. You can say fuck once, that's kind of like the rule of thumb, and it goes pretty light. Like I feel like it's almost more of it blurs the line between like thriller and horror, because I when I think of horror, I think of being more gore, more kind of graphic, especially these days. Where I think thriller kind of has elements of horror, but doesn't try and make you like look away from the screen.
I think a big part of horror should have some tension in it, and it does okay with that too. So I think it leans closer to horror, but I get what you're saying. We haven't really brought it up yet, but maybe this is shocking, but I think Corey Haim deserves a ton of credit for this movie because he's a kid playing a paraplegic kid, which in it of itself is pretty tough. And it's a good way to say this without sounding like a total shithead. He does a really good job in this role. Like, there's moments where you can see his legs move a little bit if you're really picking it apart. It's certainly questionable how he climbs a tree. Like, I'm not sure I buy that.
Yes. I was questioning that myself.
They don't ever show that. They do show him scale the side of his house very higher than the house, like, a couple times.
Oh, he's got tremendous upper body strength. Yeah,
he really does. But they do a good job, like, making Corey Haim, like, especially as a kid actor. And I think I'm probably the one who's more annoyed with kid actors on this show than you are. He doesn't bother me in this movie at all. He's pretty good in this movie. And he plays off his sister and his uncle really well. Obviously, Gary Busey's the uncle, and we're going to get to him. But his sister is almost like, of the three main characters, she's almost the forgotten one because she has stuff to do in the movie, but it's kind of like, okay, the sister's on, time to go take a piss, get a drink, and come back. Like, there's not a lot that happens when she's the only character carrying the story, she's not bad. Like, they cut through those pretty quick, but it really is Corey Haim's movie for the most part.
Well, she does also discover who the actual
absolutely
wolf is. Like, she has the confrontation with the character and all that tension. So I think that's kind of minimizing it a little bit, but I get where you're coming from.
I do think it's funny too that although I like Gary Busey's character in this, and I think that for the most part he's made to be likable. Like, he seems like the uncle that has problems, but at the heart of it gives a shit about these two kids, his niece and nephew. So that's cool. I also question if Gary Busey's doing everything he can to paralyze this kid a second time.
So I know what you're getting at. I have never in my life ever heard of a gas-powered wheelchair. Even the early one, the first one, which is like, and then the second
pretty
one,
awesome in itself.
The first one I like. The second one, when the actual silver bullet, like the reimagined silver bullet.
It's like a moped, like tricycle thing.
I think it looks horrible.
Well,
I mean, for a kid, for a 9, 10, whatever year old kid he's supposed to be, yeah, that would probably, in the 80s, mid 80s, would probably think that's pretty cool. But I looked at that and I was like, oof, that looks so ugly. Like the big flags and all that stuff. And the kids just riding 45, 50 miles an hour, passing people, like no helmet. Kid's already paralyzed. Give him a goddamn helmet, for Christ's sake. Busey's not a fan of helmets, though. I think that's proven.
I think it's funny, too, that, one, I'm not sure how the kid's paying for gas, because he does run out of gas, like, daily, which is also a plot point. But he doesn't have a job, so where's he getting gas money for? And I understand, too, this was, like, 1985 when this came out, and apparently it took place in 76, so gas might have been slightly cheaper than it is right now, but still. I also like, on top of him giving this kid these rocket wheelchairs, gas-powered wheelchairs that are capable of outrunning cars, and well, at least one of them does a couple times. He's also like, here's some fireworks, kid, go blow yourself up, more or less. So
one thing I learned from this movie is that you can light fireworks like mere inches from your face and just leave them there. And it's like, nah, that's no problem. That's cool.
Right. I like how he's doing that, and they get away from him. He's like, yay, yay. Like, he very much so sounds like a kid who's already realized that fireworks are not that fucking cool. I'm sure there's more I could like go on about, because if you haven't figured out, I am a fan of this one. Are there any negatives that you have on this movie?
Well, besides the silver bullet looking really stupid when he finally gets the revised one, can you explain to me? So I'm not the smartest person in the world, and I know the preview. So we showed the trailer because we showed it for Frankenstein's last month.
Yeah.
And in the trailer that they mentioned that this happens month over, like it happens once a month. But in this movie, it feels like it's not really clearly marked that this is happening once a month. It feels like this is like a week.
Yeah, I can explain that.
Okay, please do.
So the original story, and I forget what the story is, it's like Night Curse, or I don't remember what the fuck it's called. The original story was based off a calendar series or something like that. So he wrote the story based off the lunar eclipse on the calendar. So you would get part of the story over the course of a year each time there was a full moon or something to that effect. So it wasn't originally written as a book or a novel or whatever. When he continued working on the story, he basically figured out this isn't a good way to tell a story. Maybe stopped doing cocaine for a couple hours and said, I could do much better telling this. And he turned it into a short story. The time frame in the movie, I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think it's like over a few weeks, something like that. Like, it doesn't say exactly, or at least I don't remember it saying. But the reason it says that in the trailer is because the original story that's based off of was a calendar story of some sort, and that's how he wrote the story to begin with. And it was reformatted into a short novella, whatever the fuck that is, and then someone else wrote the script, and he basically red penned all over it and made what ended up being the script that we got.
So this doesn't follow like the mythical Wolfman werewolf that comes out on the full moon. Because it seems like the full moon lasts days.
I don't think so, because I think the initial story, and I bet if we read the book, which I'm not going to do, it probably does follow that more. But with this, it seems like he can just kind of turn whatever night he wants. So it seems like they kind of
at will.
They kind of pick and choose. I feel like it's kind of at will when they decide to go with classic werewolf lore, as opposed to just like, well, we need to get this movie shot. So,
yeah. Okay, that's kind of what I thought. I kind of looked it up a little bit. I didn't read so much into like the origins of the story or how it kind of progressed into a short story, a novella, whatever, into a script. But I was just kind of like, okay, I can understand if they're going with this thing that's not supposed to be so much based on like real, as real as it can be, real wolf or, werewolf lore or whatever. But I was just like, what is the timeline supposed to be? Because it felt like there was a time when he gave him the fireworks. He did say, Gary Busey, Uncle Red, did say it's like 4th of July, but it's in September.
It got canceled because that kid got the fuck murdered out of him, where that guy has a great like O face, like, I'm so upset, which that will be reposted at some point too.
And then when they do the deed with the Wolfman and the actual titular, that's like my favorite word. So if I say titular too many times, the titular silver bullet, that happens on Halloween because that's when the parents go out of town. Yeah. So that is a month later. So it kind of, maybe it is supposed to be monthly. They just don't really, the way that it's kind of told in the story, it feels like it's like day after day, like people are just getting murdered every day in this place and nobody quite knows.
It seems like it, doesn't it?
So. Yeah, exactly what's going on. I think my other real big complaint about the movie is that, like, literally the end of this movie, I cannot stand freeze frames. And I feel like
I like how abruptly the movie ends, but I get where you're going with this.
Yeah, it's just like, it's so super abrupt. It just kind of fades out and that's it. And then on top of that, I don't really understand why there's narration. Like, they do the narration and it feels like it's one of those instances where they do narration because they didn't want to film something to like bridge it together to tell you what they're telling you in the narration. But it just feels weird. It feels out of place because it pops up like kind of like in the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie and just bookends the movie, and there's no real narration through the rest of it.
I can piggyback on that because one of my nitpicks with this, and it's more of a nitpick than a complaint, is I feel like Corey Haim should be the narrator. Like, I get that Jane is one of the main characters, and like you said, she's the one who ties all the shit together right before the third act, blah, blah, blah. But again, this story is more about Marty Coslaw, and the majority of the events in this movie all kind of revolve around Marty Coslaw being the one who figures out what's going on, seeing what's happening. He's the character that you're really following, who you're rooting for the most part. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have preferred drunken Gary Busey be the narrator, but it seems like Corey Haim would have been the more appropriate character to make the narrator. But that's not what they did. It's almost like they gave Jane Coslaw, the elder Coslaw, the narration job just to give her something more to do. And that doesn't make sense, but that's kind of how it feels because it just seems out of place for her to be the one narrating it.
These goddamn kids trying to get drunk. I do want to add one more that I forgot to mention. I love, since we're on the topic of the Coslaws, I love when Janie's going around and trying to figure out who's got the eye injury, and all these like really weird, awkward stares at the camera. And they just do this montage of different people like staring or with their mouths open, like, Arr! And they just pass through all these different people and they all have these really just dumbfounded expressions on their face. I really appreciated that.
It looks like they put some weird like filter on the lens or something for that too, because everything is just a little bit more like of this golden like autumn color at that point. Like the tone of everything changes for that sequence. And it goes back to what it was beforehand, but it is a weird, I could see that being a love or a hate, like, because it is such a weird like sidetrack from everything else that happens. It's a huge part of the movie because it ties, again, the beginning to the end of the movie, but it's weird how they do it. And I'm with you. I appreciate that they went weird with it and did something kind of bizarre, because this movie, it's not like it drags on. Like, it moves pretty good. It's a pretty good runtime with it. There's no real complaint there. So if you want to take a couple minutes to just do some weird shit when you're keeping it in, the runtime that we usually like, hey, all right, no problem. Yeah, I don't have any big dislikes on it. Like I said, my biggest one would just be that I think it's weird that Corey Haim or Marty Coslaw is not the one who's narrating this. Yeah. In a very Wonder Years type way. Yeah, I mean, other than that, it'd just be like, I don't really want to like complain too much about the actual transformation or the werewolf. I've already said my piece on that. So it is what it is. We've seen better. We've seen worse.
Yeah, I mean, I was, along with you, I was really kind of unimpressed by just the werewolf design in general. And the transformation was kind of a little sad. Yeah. It kind of got to be like the original Wolfman, not Michael Landis.
I think that looks better. Because I think with that one being in black and white, it hides some of the
more impressive. Well, and being so much older, this just goes from like, it's almost like an inflatable doll that they pulled the plug out and it just kind of deflates, and then there's a guy sitting there,
what I do like that comes after that, so we'll go ahead. See, we're getting all likes on this one. I do like the Gary Busey stunts that he performed. Apparently, he injured himself doing it once the werewolf shows up.
I don't disbelieve that. Yeah, he's getting thrown around.
They just ragdoll all this breakable furniture, and I like that. I like that we're watching a werewolf who's just been like murdering people with no remorse for this entire movie. He's ripped heads off. He's cut people in half. He's all this shit. And then when he gets to Gary Busey, it's like WWE time, and he's just throwing them into walls and
picking people up by their heads and not killing them, and throwing people around and
giving them time to reload, all that shit. Yeah.
Steven Seagal in what was that movie?
Kill Switch?
Yes, Kill Switch, where he's kicking the dude 500 times through like tables and shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. But yeah, that's all I really have.
Wolf,
like I said, that's all I got, man. I'm a wolf. I'm going to go howl at the moon and hopefully
don't shoot wolf things, man.
You could shoot me with a copper bullet. Don't shoot me with no silver bullet, man. That's all I got. What time is it?
Don't melt down a crucifix.
Then you're in for a big treat, bro. Because it's hot dog time.
I went first last week, so go ahead and lead us off here.
I don't think you did go first last week, but I'll take the reins this time. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. So again, as we mentioned earlier, I'd never seen this before. Obviously, I knew about it. I knew it was a thing, but I hadn't actually sat down and watched it like that I can remember from start to finish. I think it's a lot of fun. It's got some gore. We mentioned it earlier. It's got some, but it's not overly gross. It's not overly graphic. It feels to me like a gateway horror film for someone that's just like dipping their toes into the genre. It is R-rated, but it feels like if it were rated today, it would probably get a PG-13 or maybe even a PG. Busey's great as the Drunkle. Haim is not overly annoying, and he's not super obnoxious, so that's always a plus in my book when it comes to a role from Cory Haim. I'd give Silver Bullet half a hot dog. It's not something I feel like I need to see again, but if you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend it. I think it's a good movie. I just reserve my full hot dogs. Like if I'm going to serve a full hot dog, it's going to be for something that I would myself watch again, but I think it gets, for sure, if I could give 3/4 of a hot dog, it probably would get 3/4 of a hot dog. It's a really fun, really good movie, like gateway horror. I almost asked my kids if they wanted to watch it, but I knew they'd say no, so I didn't even bother.
You're the host of this show. You can give this as many hot dogs as you want.
No, I can't. We've changed the rating scale. It's like 50 episodes ago. No.
You could still do quarter hot. Anyway.
Whose hot dog is this? That's yours?
So yeah, I pretty much mirror what you said. Like, again, this is a pretty approachable horror movie. It's got wolf stuff. In the big scheme of things, it's probably one of the better werewolf movies out there just because the story is told really well. Most of the human characters are likable, and the werewolf shenanigans are more good than bad. I don't go and watch this like a lot. Like, this is not an every year watch or anything like that, but I have rewatched it. I will continue to rewatch it. Ultimately, more than anything, like, this is just a pretty well told story. It's a pretty quick moving beginning, middle, and end with details in it that are, for the most part, logical. And it doesn't leave you with too many what the fuck was that all about moments to really hold you back. Like, this is, for a movie that I'm not saying like, yeah, you absolutely need to watch this and watch it like all the time. It's kind of weird because neither of us had any real big nitpicks on this or any big like negatives on this one. It's just, I think its biggest drawback is the movies that do it better. I'm primarily thinking like American Werewolf in London, maybe a handful of others. They do it so much better that it makes it like more of a, hey, I'm having a werewolf marathon, or I'm having a Stephen King marathon, or a Gary Busey marathon type movie than I just need to watch Silver Bullet again because it's Silver Bullet, you know? So yeah, I'd give it a full hot dog. I think it's good. I think it's one of the better of its subgenre, and it's quite a bit of fun. So yeah. Our question of the week this week is, well, I kind of stole an idea from Justin over at Pop Culture Reflections podcast. He often does recasting in movies, and this is kind of playing that, except we're doing it backwards. So our question this week is, if you could recast any Stephen King character with Gary Busey, which one would you choose? So the idea is that you're going to have Gary Busey playing a different Stephen King character. So we're going to start over on Instagram, because that's where I'm at right now. And we'll start with XX Pearly XX, and she says, Carrie, could you imagine his blood-covered chiclet teeth and him wearing those sexy silk wearing that sexy silk while he burns those assholes up. It'd be amazing.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Our good friend Jordana over at Pretty Killer Podcast says Gary Busey should play Gage in Pet Sematary. I actually haven't seen Pet Sematary in fucking forever, so I don't even remember who Gage is, but I'm all for it.
Isn't that the little kid?
Not sure. Is it?
I don't know. Just throwing that out there. Sounds like a little kid name.
You know what? Let's hope it is. Is that the kid that gets hit by the semi-truck or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Well, good.
Yay! Go me.
Gary Busey goes splat. BJ Mambo on Instagram still says Pennywise. He would be so nutty. I agree. He'd probably be a pretty entertaining Pennywise. Friend Greg, who's Old Nerdy Bastard, one of the Krusty Boys, also says Pennywise the Clown. Good one there. And then our friends over at Dissect That Film said the dad in Pet Sematary. That dude sucks. Gary Busey would make it way more enjoyable of a film. Apparently,
hey,
we
all float down here. That's my Gary Busey impersonation as Pennywise. I would tell you how we all float down here. I don't even know if that's a good Busey impersonation. Let us know in the comments.
Switching over to Threads, we had no answers on Blue Sky today. So on Threads, we have Patrick Kelly 368, and he says Cujo as the title character.
The titular
Stay tuned.
character.
We might have something coming up that would be kind of in that realm.
Wouldn't be Busey. Wouldn't be Busey month without it.
Wayne 0R says, Uncle Red, am I doing this right? Was this wrong answers only? I replied, there's no wrong answers, but we're looking for characters there's no wrong answers, but we're looking to recast characters. So like Gary Busey as Jack Torrance or something like that. And he says, okay.
Sounds good.
Current Gary Busey in place as vintage Gary Busey then. So he wants the same character just with whatever Gary
different
Busey
era
is
Busey.
now. Right.
Different model.
Danger in Charlie says Gary Busey as the werewolf in Silver Bullet. Let that sink in. I feel like that's the bait and switch that people probably think if they haven't seen this movie. I gotta think in this day and age, if you hear Gary Busey werewolf movie, you're automatically thinking Gary Busey's a werewolf, right?
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, if he
hadn't seen it. I wasn't sure who was going to be the werewolf for a little bit.
If he could play an evil demon cookie, then he could play a werewolf. So.
There you go.
And then, as mentioned earlier, Justin over at Pop Culture's Reflection Podcast says,
you stole my idea. Is that what he said?
Pretty much. He says, Gary Busey as Pennywise would be fun, or as Tommy and Carrie, the guy that takes her to the prom. I think Pennywise is kind of the leader in the clubhouse right now. Sean, what say you? Do you have a character in mind that Gary Busey should play that was in a Stephen King thing?
The monkey bashing the cymbals in Monkey Shines.
I think Gary Busey should play the semi-truck in Maximum Overdrive.
The Green Goblin semi-truck. Gary Busey as the Green Goblin semi-truck.
But I wanted to have Busey's teeth.
I was going to say, imagine the horror show of his teeth being in that big ass grin. Yeah, that would have made it 100 times scarier.
See that? If in the next year Stephen King has a collection of short stories where he rewrites everything to have Gary Busey play different characters, you can thank us for it. I think that's all we got for this week. We'll be back next week with more Gary Busey shenanigans. In the meantime, we do ask that if you would like to, you can check us out at our site, which is crap.town. You can also leave us feedback or suggestions as to what we might want to watch on there. You can find all of our content as well at Rockin' Tomatoes. It's going to take you to crap.town, but it's absolutely available and you can do that. You can go to yourunpodcast.com. That is the podcast network that we're on. You can find all of our old episodes as well as all of our new episodes and all the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network, like Pop Culture Reflections Podcast, or You Can Eat That Crust. We mentioned both of them in this episode. You can listen to them there. It's a good thing. You should do it. And then, of course, you can find us on all the social medias at Dewey Podmonster, all the ones that we give a shit about anyway. Sean, what am I missing?
Well, if you want your answer to the question of the week, just like these other fine people that submitted their answers to the question of the week, if you want yours read on this show, you got to follow us on social media. John posts those usually the day of the show. If you go on social media, you're looking for Dewey Pod Monster, you'll probably find those questions of the week. I also wanted to mention everything we talked about on the show will be in the show notes. If you're interested in watching any of the things we talked about, if you're interested in finding out more about some of the things that we talked about, most of the things we talked about, you can find it in the show notes. Most of those links are free links. We try to make it free if we can, but sometimes it's just unavoidable. You have to post them places where it's pay. If you see any of those, they're tagged with Amazon. Those are affiliate links. If you click those links, you buy anything, we get a penny or two for every jillion of the dollars that you spend. And also, if you want to follow any of my social media misadventures, I post stupid little clips. I'll be posting a really funny one of Gary Busey in this movie when this episode comes out. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky exclusively. You can find me at internalbleeding.crap.town. That's my new handle. Or just internal-bleeding.bisky.social. That's confusing. I'm sure it's confusing. I'll link that in the show notes. How about that? Find me there.
So that's it. We're both thoroughly confused now. We'll be back next week. Have yourself a good one and swill up.
Blah, blah, blah.